When you have to shoot, don't talk.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Another Trap House podcast here for you. We got a great guest. Mike Sells is with us out of Iowa. He's a retired CO, trapper. Has a couple books out, a few DVDs. He's done a lot, and I've seen a lot in his time out. So he's going to share a bunch of stories with us. We're going to talk to him in just a minute. Before we do that, we got to say a big thanks and shout out to our sponsors. We have J3 Outdoors with us, j3o.com. Head over to their website. They have numerous products here that are so handy, especially if you're a trapper in the marsh or in the creeks, rivers, and streams, that sort of thing. But he's got bait holders, beaver rod ends, different brackets and spring clips, a tail hook that makes it a little easier for guys that like to hang their muskrats' skin. I'm a big fan of the universal lock that they offer. But yeah, anyway, check out j3o.com and you'll be surprised and pleased with their site there. There's a lot there offered. Also, traplinecoffee.com. Check it out. These guys, there's a couple different brews there. There's a cherry red blend, Kodiak blend, and a trapline blend. So if you're a coffee drinker, something to get in your cup before you head out to check your traps, you might want to give this a shot. And a lot of the money goes to the National Trappers Association. So, get a good cup of coffee and you're help fighting the fight that we all need to be aware of to keep the antis at bay so we can continue to do what we love to do. We also have Top Lot Stretcher Company. Their website is toplotstretcherco.com. And there's a whole list of things there on their website. Trapping supplies. We're always preaching about the adjustable stretchers. We really love what he's got there. Fine product. And yeah, head on over there. There's everything from traps, stuff you could use in the fur shed, all that good stuff. So, and we also have Weeby Knives. That's weebyknives.com. Everything fleshing knives, skinning knives, that stuff to use in the field. They got a new fillet knife that's out. Pretty slick website. You definitely want to check it out. We use their products quite a bit with skinning. Weebyknives.com. And last but not least, Hoosier Trapper Supply. That's HoosierTrapperSupply.com. We got everything you need to get going out there. We got starter kits, package deals, lure packages, pack baskets, you name it, hardware, snares, and of course our line of lure and bait, home of the Top Dog Predator Bait and Jet Fuel Predator Lure. So head over to HoosierTrapperSupply.com to check out all that good stuff. All right, I think I covered everything. Let's go talk to Mike. Oh, one last thing too. Don't forget about Hoosier Trapper Outdoors. We've been rotating the podcast and the outdoor show back and forth every week throughout the entire trapping season. So we're definitely pumping out content. There's a lot of good stuff that we talk about and things we show on Hoosier Trapper Outdoors. So don't forget to head over there on YouTube. But let's go talk to Mike. All right, Mike Sells is with us for another Trap House podcast. He's out of Iowa, retired CO, trapper. He helped organize the 2017 Iowa Trappers Convention they had there for the National. A list of all kinds of other stuff. So we're just going to dive in and kind of see. We love talking to trappers, like-minded trappers, and just kind of get your input on that section of the area as far as trapping goes, and yeah, all the good stuff.
Okay.
Sound good, Mike?
Sounds good to me.
So when did you get started trapping?
Well, I started a little unusual than most people. Most people start, in fair weather, but I started on the ice. So I got started trapping in 1960, and I was 12 years old, and it was during Christmas school break. I was in 7th grade, and I was out. We lived not far from Black Hawk Creek in Waterloo, Iowa at that time. Cedar River runs through Waterloo. Anyway, I'm on the ice, and I saw this guy walking towards me, And being curious, I went up to him and I asked him what he was doing. And he said he'd been trapping muskrats and he was going to move his sets somewhere else. And I said, and he had some muskrats and he showed them to me. Really neat. First time I'd ever seen any muskrats. And so I said, well, how do you catch them? And he must have recognized there was a potential trapper there, because he said, well, follow me back. So we followed him. I followed him back to where he had just pulled a set. And he said, now get down on your knees and look down in there. And so I'm looking under the ice. And he said, look back towards the bank. And there was a hole back there, a hole about that big around coming out of the bank. And he said, you see that hole? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, he said, you just set a trap in front of that hole. And muskrats, when they come out or going in, their back feet are just a paddling away. And with a trap there, you catch a muskrat. Well, anyway, to make a longer story short, that guy lent me 3 traps, 3 number 1 long spring traps, showed me how to set them, showed me how to place that trap in front of that muskrat den, how to stake it. And he left me, told me where he lived. And so I set 3 of those 3 traps and went back to where he'd already pulled traps. He said there was still muskrats around there, but he'd taken the cream of them and he was going to go somewhere else. Well, the next day I had my first muskrat. And of course, 12-year-old kid, you can imagine I was pretty excited. So I took it to his house and left it with him. He skinned it and showed me how to skin it. Didn't ask me to skin it. He just did it. Well, anyway, over the next several days during that school break, I ended up catching 3 muskrats. So, and every day I took him to his house. Well, at the end of the time when I got to go back to school, he said, I'll tell you what, if you're willing to do it, he said, I'll just give you those 3 traps for those 3 muskrats. So it sounded like a deal to me. So that's how I got started. Well, the next year, the guy moved. So that was the last I ever saw of that guy. The next year, my grandpa had said he would go with me on opening day and show me how to make, and it was open water, show me how to make some sets, which we did. And that year, I think I caught 14 muskrats, I think, total. But we only had 1 night of open water, and then it froze up. And then I like to wore myself out chopping holes looking for bank dens. And it taught me a valuable lesson that when I got open water and I want bank dens, I better be marking those dens so that when it ices over, I know right where to set my traps. And I've remembered that ever since then, and I use that quite often. So that's how I got started. That first year was 3 muskrats, the next year was 14. The next year, I think I was up to 50. Let's see, 60, I started in 60. 62, I caught my first raccoon. 63, I caught my first beaver. And that was an interesting thing because, man, I was excited with that beaver. And I'd been reading all these mountain men stories in the school library. I hated school, but I loved the library, and I could find out all these trapping books and read them. There wasn't much trapping printed stuff back in those days. Fur Fish Game was about the only magazine that had anything. Well, anyway, 63, I caught my first beaver, and boy, I was excited. And I didn't know how to skin it, but my neighbor down the road told me that there was an old lady down the road that used to trap beaver. So I took it down to her and she skinned it for me. And then I took it to my fur dealer and he looked at it and he almost cried because she had skinned it open, slit up the belly and slit up each of the legs. And he said, that ain't how you skin beaver. I didn't know. But anyway, shortly after that, the river froze up and I didn't catch any more beaver. Well, that was in the fall of 63. And we had a very severe winter that winter. And in January, we had a bit of a spring, what we call a spring thaw, when it really warms up above freezing. And on a Friday night, the school bus dropped me off at our house. And I still had a little bit of daylight, so I ran down to the river. By then, we'd moved back out and lived right on the banks of the Cedar River. Anyway, I ran down to the river and I saw where a beaver had come out of the ice. And man, I ran home and I grabbed a trap. I had one number 4 trap. And I went down and I set that trap. Next morning I had that beaver. So I ran over to where this lady that had badly skinned that first beaver, she had some traps. So I borrowed some traps from her, some beaver traps. Number 4, Victor double long springs or Blake and Lamb, whatever they were. And so that next day, Saturday, I had that beaver. And I spent the whole day on the river looking for more places to set beaver traps. And I set a few more traps. Well, Sunday, I had another beaver. So now I've got my 3rd beaver of the season. And man, I am excited. So I decided I'm not going to go to school on Monday. I'm heading to the river. Wow. So I intentionally missed the school bus. Well, I never knew what time my mother got out of bed because my mother was not the type of a lady to get out of bed in the morning and get us kids off to school. We fended for ourselves. And so she was always in bed when we got on the school bus. Well, that morning I found out what time she got out of bed. About 2 minutes after that bus was gone, Mom got out of bed, saw that I was still there, and she got madder than the dickens. And she said, "By God, if you ain't going to school, you ain't living here." And I said goodbye, and I never went back. I went I'm 15 years old. It's January 1964, and the weather's nice. It's like 30, 32 degrees, almost shirt sleeve weather when you've been 20 and 30 below zero for several weeks. Anyway, so I ran down to the river and I was mad because she was kicking me out. So I ran down to the river, I pulled my traps, I ran back to the house, packed everything I had. I had a little Boy Scout backpack, packed everything I could find that I owned into that backpack, and I took off. And I got to back up a little bit. We'd lived right in that same area for most of my childhood, but for 3 years, starting at Christmas time of 6th grade, we moved to town. We lived in town for 3 years. Well, I got in a little bit of trouble in town. I was kind of wild. So the folks didn't figure that was real good for us. So we moved back out to the country. So now we're back out in the country. So when I packed all my stuff and I hit the road, one hand I got fishing poles, the other hand I got a shotgun. Got all my clothes and backpack, everything in my backpack, a little bit of food stuck away in there. And I'm heading back to town because for those 3 years we lived in town was all of junior high, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And I pretty well lived on Black Hawk Creek. So that's where I'm headed. Well, I only got not even a mile down the road, and here comes Mom in the car. And she says, "Hop in, I'll give you a ride. Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, take me back to town, drop me off at Meadowdale store. I'm going to go make myself a camp down at the creek." So that's what I did. So I went down there and I made myself a camp. I had a little pup tent, and I knew that about 3:30 every day, the school bus for the school kids dropped these kids off that I used to run around with, dropped them off at Meadowdale store. So when that bus arrived, I'm sitting on the front steps of Meadowdale store with a bottle of Coke in my hand, and a couple of my buddies that I hadn't seen since we moved back out in the country. "Well, Mike, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I left home. I'm living down at the creek." And they said, "Oh, good." So they followed me down to my camp, and we sat around, and I had a campfire already going. They sat around my campfire till dark, smoking cigarettes and telling tall tales. And I was talking about as tall tales as you can tell when you're 15 years old. So they left at dark. And so I'm on my own. The next day, just a repeat of that day. I was back up at Meadowdale store when they got off the bus. They came down to my camp and sat around. But one of the guys told me, they said, hey, Mike, we got a real bad cold front coming and it's going to get way below zero again. And I said, that's all right. I'm tough. I can handle it. Well, I've lived by that. I'm tough ever since then. And let me digress just a bit. I wrote my very first book I ever wrote right here is You Got to Be Tough, subtitled A Paratrooper Story. So I've always lived by that motto of you got to be tough. Anyway, by gosh, well, come dark, those kids all left and went back home. And then that cold front moved in and I like to froze to death. I couldn't get to sleep at all that night. I sat in front of my tent to the back, my campfire in front of me, had my sleeping bag wrapped around me. Every stitch of clothes that I owned, I had on. I only had 2 or 3 pairs of socks. I had those all on. I had 2 shirts on. I like to froze to death. And in the morning, this one kid brought his dad down to my camp. And the kid's name was Kenny Brandt. His dad's name was Ken. Called him Big Ken, Little Ken. Big Ken looked around and he said, Mike, you can't live like this. You come up and live with us till spring. I said, okay. So they helped me tear down my camp, and I did. I went and lived with them until spring. And never saw my mother again until December. But anyway, when I moved in with the Brandts, about a month later, I got a letter from my mother. And within that time, they had my mother and stepdad and sister and brother moved to Florida. So I'm on my own. I'm on my own. And Ken and Leon Brandt were really good to me. They had a house full of kids. One of their daughters, I was in the same grade with her. Kenny Brandt, the kid that came down to my camp all the time, he was 1 or 2 grades younger than I was. But I stayed with them till spring, and then I took off and headed for Minnesota. Actually, I was heading for Canada because I had this big idea in my head I was going to be a guide at a fishing resort in Canada. So I started hitchhiking, heading for Canada, but I didn't get there. 3 days later, I'm hungry, and I'm in north central Minnesota, and I knew I needed to find a job because I'm broke and I hadn't eaten for at least a day. So I walked down this road, and pretty soon I came to a house. First thing I saw was a barn, super nice barn, but the house was an authentic log cabin, 2-story log cabin. It was in good shape, but I walked up to that door. This is just after daylight in May of 1964. And I walked up to the door, knocked on the door, and by gosh, this little old lady come to the door. And my immediate impression was this was Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies. Exactly what she looked like. And so I told her, I said, my name is Mike Sells from from Waterloo, Iowa. And I said, I was headed to Canada, but I need a job. I said, do you guys need any help around here? No, she said, we quit farming a couple of years ago, but she said, if you keep walking down this road, she said, the next place you come to on the north side of the road, she said, Gerald and Edith live there. And last fall, their 2 sons left and moved to Oregon. And all winter, Gerald's been grumbling about he needs some help to help him milk his cows. She said, you walk down there, you'll find him in his barn right now. So that's what I did. I walked down the road. Sure enough, Gerald was in a barn, a terrible sway back, long, narrow barn that was built into the ground. You had to step down. And he's in there sitting on a stool, milking cows by hand, no electricity. So I told him, hey, the lady up the road sent me down here, said you might need some help. And he said, I need some help. He said, do you know how to milk? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, if you're willing to milk, he said, I need the help, but he said, I don't have any money. So he said, if you're willing to work for room and board, pull up a stool and start milking. So that's what I did. And I stayed with them until fall. And Gerald was a wonderful guy. He was far better than my stepdad. And that's one of the main reasons I left home. First, mom kicked me out, but second, my stepdad was terrible abusive to me. And so I never, I had no, I, I had no qualms about leaving home. Anyway, Gerald was a good guy, but his wife, Edith, wonderful cook, but she's always complaining about something. I'm 15, turned 16 while I was there, and I'm not tolerant of complaining. Well, anyway, yeah, let me keep on with my trapping stuff here. That summer, we were making hay with one of the neighbors. And of course, when you make hay with your neighbors, they feed you at lunchtime. Well, at lunchtime, we had a radio going, and the state of Minnesota in 1964 was having a terrible rabies epidemic. And there was an appeal came across the radio for all sportsmen to go out of the way and kill skunks. So, because they're a major carrier of rabies. So I'm going to do my good deed for the state of Minnesota. So I started trapping skunks. And by gosh, I trapped a lot of skunks. And the very first day, I'm walking along this trail, checking my traps after the milking and everything's done. And I didn't see the skunk until it saw me before I saw it, and it sprayed me full blast. Well, you guys are trappers, so you know after a while, it stinks like the high, it stinks as bad as it can get. But after a little while, your nose gets immune to it. And I totally forgot I'd been sprayed by the time I got back to the house. But boy, when I got back to the house, as quick as I walked in the house, Edith kicked me out of the house.
Yeah.
I never got back in that house after that. I ate all my meals outside on a picnic table. And she had attached to the house. And remember, there's no electricity at all in this place. So she cooked everything on a wood cook stove. But she had another cook stove on the porch. And on rainy days, I could get as far as the porch. But aside from that, I ate everything outside. I had acquired a World War II jungle hammock. And I had it slung between two birch trees in the front yard. And that hammock, it's comfortable. The hammock's got a mosquito netting in it, and it's got a roof over it. And I'm totally comfortable. I ain't got no problem at all living in that hammock, sleeping in the hammock. But I'm going to tell you something. When you in the middle of the night and a thunderstorm comes up and you're in a hammock, that is an experience because you get to swaying back and forth from the wind blowing and but anyway, so I had a wonderful time up there, but then I had a bit of a disagreement with Edith, and I left. So the only thing I knew is I grabbed all my stuff and I hitchhiked back to Iowa, and I got a job on a dairy farm at Fairbank, Iowa, for $1 an hour. I'd worked all summer for room and board, had no money, but now I'm in the money. I got $1 an hour. 1964. I was 16 years old by then, and anyway, that's some of my early experiences. I stayed with that guy until in 67, I went in the Army. I went down to the draft board one day in August of 67 in Waterloo, and I said, say, can you look on your list and tell me when I'm going to get drafted? And the lady in charge there, she said, we can't do that. And she said, why do you want to know? And I said, well, I just had a buddy that just got back from Vietnam and he'd lost an eye. And I said, I know you guys are going to get me. I just want to know when so I can be prepared. She said, well, I can't tell you, but she said, if you want to go, she said, I can put your name at the top of the list and you'll go next month. I said, well, let's do that. So I got drafted, but in reality, I volunteered for the draft. So in October of 67, I'm heading for Fort Bliss, Texas, and went to basic training at Fort Bliss, Texas. Second day of January, I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, to infantry school. And then after infantry school, I went to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia, to become a paratrooper. I got to back up a little bit. In after basic training, had 2 weeks leave, went back to Iowa, and the day after I got back was the opening day of the beaver trapping season, which was December 18th that year. So I trapped beaver for 10 days and I caught 10 beaver. And then I'm off to infantry school. When I got to infantry school, I met a guy from Columbus, Ohio. His name was John Douglas Van Walsen. And we were in the same barracks. We were in the same bunk. He had the top, I had the bottom. Became really good friends. And he was always wanting to know about trapping beaver. Well, I figured when I graduated from infantry school, that'd be the end. But turned out John had volunteered to go to jump school also. So we rode the same bus to Fort Benning, Georgia. And we ended up in the same barracks. He had the top bunk, I had the bottom bunk. And when we graduated from jump school, he's going back to Ohio. I'm going to go to, actually, I went to Florida for a couple of weeks. That's where my mom was at. I had 30 days leave, and then I was going to go to Vietnam. So I had orders to report to Fort Dix, New Jersey. When I got to Fort Dix, New Jersey, last part of April of '68, there was John Douglas Van Walsen. And we were in the same barracks again. And we got all of our shots and everything. You got everything ready to go to Vietnam. And we sat side by side on the airplane flying to Vietnam. We got the 90th Replacement Detachment. We both were assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade up in the Central Highlands. We flew on the same plane going up there. We both got assigned to the 1st Battalion, but he got assigned to Alpha Company and I got assigned to Charlie Company. We've become lifelong friends. We'd see each other in passing every once in a while. We went on R&R in February of '69. We went on R&R together to Japan. Had a great time. I got wounded real bad in April of '69 and spent some time in the hospital in Vietnam. And John came to visit me just before they flew me to Japan. Once I got stabilized, they flew me to Japan. And then I don't know how long I stayed in Japan, but once I got well enough to where they could fly me to the States, then I flew from the Japan hospital to a hospital here in the States. Actually, the first hospital was in Washington, D.C. And then they flew me to Fort Gordon Army Hospital. And I stayed in that hospital until I got discharged out of the Army. But my last 2 weeks that I was in the Army, I'm laying in this hospital bed and I am going crazy because I feel like I'm in good shape, but I can't get out of I'm not supposed to get out of the building. And so I just lay in the bed reading and not doing nothing, wandering up and down the halls. And one morning I told the doctor, making his morning rounds, I said, "Doc, you got to get me out of this bed. I'm actually going to go crazy." And he said, and it was a beautiful day. And he said, "You know, it's a beautiful day out there." And he said, "If you were not in the Army right now, what would you be doing?" I said, "Man, I'd be out there fishing somewhere." He said, "I got just the job for you." He said, "Here on our base, we have our own game wardens." And he said, "I'm going to get you assigned to work with those game wardens until we get through with your evaluation and get you out of here." I said, "Okay." So my last 2 weeks that I was in the Army, I worked with the game wardens, the Army game wardens at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And we went around, they got a lot of fishing lakes there, and we picked up roadkill deer, and we checked fishing licenses. We sold bait to people coming in through the gates for the fishing. And so I was a game warden in 1969, in May of 1969, long before I became a real game warden in August of 1975. Well, anyway, then after I got discharged out of the Army, I went back to Iowa and met my wife. I'd actually met my wife. Yeah, I'll back up on this story too. In September of 68, towards the end of September of 68, we got in some really, really severe battles. Lost a lot of guys to the point in 2 days, we lost most of the company. Wasn't many of us left. And we're back at the rear. They pulled us into a rear area and waiting for replacements. And me and a couple of my buddies were shooting pool in this tent that had a pool table in it. Off on a wall, I saw this poster, and in between shots, I wandered down there, and there's this notice from the Vietnam mail lady. She said, "Hey, GIs, how would you like to have lots of girls from all across the United States writing to you?" Anyway, so I called my buddies over and I said, "Let's do this." So we all put our names in, sent our names off to this Vietnam lady. She was from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Well, that was close to Waterloo. It was only within 90 miles of Waterloo. So, by gosh, that was the end of September, early October. Well, by the end of October, we started getting mail from girls all across the United States. And I was writing, from the rest of my time on, I was writing to 4 or 5 girls. One of them ended up being my wife, Judy. And she was from Sumner, Iowa, living at Waverly, Iowa. She was an IBM key punch operator at Lutheran Mutual Life Insurance Company at the time. Anyway, we just kind of clicked pretty good in our writing back and forth. So after I got discharged from the Army, I spent a couple of weeks in Florida. Then I came back to Iowa. And my very first day in Iowa, I called up Judy. I knew at the time she got off work. And I called her up and I said, "You want to go on a date tonight?" She said, "Yeah." So I went up and picked her up, and it was the first time we met face to face, went out on a date. That was the 3rd of June. We had a date, I think, just about every night after that. The 23rd of June, I asked her if she'd be interested in marrying me, and she said, "Yep." So we got engaged on 23rd of June. We got met for the first time face to face the 3rd of June. 23rd of June, we got engaged, and the 11th of October, we got married. 53 years ago this last October. So anyway, she's stuck with me through all this trapping and game warden stuff. And anyway, I'll jump ahead now. If you know, I've trapped all my life. The only year I ever missed trapping was 1968. Of course, I was in Vietnam and no opportunity to trap there. I was too busy hunting, serious hunting. Anyway, so I've trapped all these years, but then one year after we were married, in fact, we were married in 69, but I think that fall, I was out squirrel hunting close to Shell Rock, Iowa. We lived at Shell Rock, Iowa. And a game warden came out. First time I'd ever seen a game warden. Game warden came out there and checked my hunting license. Nice guy. Name was Galen Hinkle. And we got visiting. And of course, I was curious. I told him I'd been a game warden for 2 weeks in the Army. He kind of got a chuckle out of that. And yeah, anyway, it turned out you had to have a college education to be a game warden in Iowa. And I had expressed an interest to him, and he said, "How far did you get in school?" And I said, "Well, I finished 9th grade." You ain't going to make it. So, of course, I quit school in 10th grade. Anyway, so I got thinking about that, and Judy and I got talking about it, and I thought, you know, if I'm going to get anywhere in life, I probably need to get my high school diploma. So I went to the principal of the Waverly Shell Rock High School. Went in one day and sat down with him, and I told him a little bit about my background. And I said, you know, I probably need that high school diploma. And I said, would you be willing to let me come back? I'd have to start in probably 10th grade. I said, would you be willing to let me come back and finish out my high school? And they said, yeah, I would. But he said, let me give you an alternative. He said, there's such a thing here in Iowa as a high school equivalency certificate. And he said, I can arrange for you to go take a whole battery of tests down at Waterloo. And if you pass those tests, you'll be given a high school equivalency certificate, which is recognized universally as a high school diploma. And he said, this is something really new that just came out. And he said, they've given this test to graduating seniors all across the United States, and they come up with an average score. And if you can meet that average score on each one of these courses, then you get your diploma. So I went and took the tests. He arranged for it, and I went and took them. And I did far better than graduating seniors. So I got a high school equivalency certificate. Well, a year later, I helped form, I was one of the founding fathers of the Shell Rock Area Sportsman's Club, and which is still going to this day. But shortly after we founded the club, that game warden that checked my license a year earlier came and gave a talk. And I told him, I said, I've got my high school equivalency certificate. And anyway, he thought that was pretty good, but he said, you got to have college. Well, a year after that, he came to another meeting and he said, they just dropped that college requirement. So you better get your application in. So I did. And finally, I had to go take another test to be a game warden. It's a 100-question test. And they sent me my score, and I didn't think I scored high enough. And I talked to the game wardens, and they said, no, that's not high enough. So 30 days later, I went and took the test again. And I got a higher score, but then they wouldn't let me take it for another 6 months. So when at 6 months, I got busy. I was in construction work, and I got busy, and I didn't go back and retake the test, and I just forgot about it. Well, then I finally got notified to come for an interview on the second day of July of 1975. And my local game warden, Glenn Angel was his name, from New Hampton, Iowa. Glenn was really trying to do his best to get me to get on. So he would come over and kind of give me some ideas of some questions that I might be asked at the interviews. And the day before my interview, Glenn came over and he said, Mike, I got some bad news. And I said, what's that? And he said, I just talked to the Des Moines office. And he said, I found out there's 5 of you going to be interviewing for one job. And he said, 3 of those guys, this was in July, 3 of those guys just graduated from college with a fish and wildlife degree. And he said, that's not good for you. And he said, the other guy, the 4th guy, he is a current park ranger with our department, been a park ranger for 5 years, and he's just wanting to make a lateral transfer over into the game warden section. And he said, he's probably going to get the job, but he has to interview. So I was kind of disheartened about that, but I'd already arranged to take the time off. So I said, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and go to the interview anyway. So I go to the interview, and a great big, huge walnut oval table in a conference room, and a bunch of these old guys sitting around. Turns out they're all the district supervisors and the section chief and bigwigs. Anyway, I spent an hour in that interview asking me all kinds of questions and giving me different scenarios. I want to know how I'd handle each little thing. And when they got done, they said, well, we're done with the interview now, but do you have anything you want to ask us? Yeah, I'd done a little bit of studying, and of course I'd been working with these game wardens, so I knew what to expect. So I just stood up and I says, well, I'm not going to ask you any of the questions that like a lot of people might ask you about what to expect of the job, because I think I know what to expect. I said, I just want to leave you with one thought in your mind. And I said, that is, if you choose me, I can guarantee you, you'll never regret your decision. I'm a hard worker. I will earn my pay, and I'll never bring any discredit on this outfit. I said, okay. So I left. Well, I go back home, and my boss, he was not wanting me to get this job because I was a foreman for his construction crew, and we just started. We had 13 houses under construction, and I was the foreman of this whole construction crew. Anyway, he told me when I got home to call him. So I called him, and he wanted to know how the interview went. And so I told him, I said, I've got some turtle traps in my slough. I said, why don't you come on over and help me run these turtle traps, and I'll tell you how it all went. So he came over, and we went off and running my turtle traps, and got back to my house, and we're standing in my driveway getting the turtles out of the pickup truck, and Judy comes running out of the house. She said, Kurt Smith is on the phone. And Kurt was one of the supervisors, the supervisor for the Northeast District of law enforcement. And he was at the interview panel. So I ran to the house, and Kurt said, we forgot to ask you a question this morning. It's a pretty important question. And he said, I need to ask it to you in person. And I said, when you want to do it? And he said, well, I'm in Waverly right now. And we were living at Waverly right then. And turns out he wasn't 5 minutes from my house. So he came over, went and sat down at the kitchen table. And I said, what's your question, Kurt? And he said, when can you start? And I said, well, does that mean I got the job? And he said, you got the job. We want you to start within 2 weeks. And this was the second day of July. And I said, well, I'd like to start the 1st of August. Well, I said, we hoping you'd start earlier than that. And I said, well, I got a couple reasons. And I said, I really owe it to my boss because we bid this construction job, and he bid it based on me being his foreman. And I keep the crew going, and we work hard and we work good. So I said, I really owe it to him to give him more than 2 weeks notice. And I said, my birthday is the 1st of August. So I said, make a really good birthday present for myself. And he said, all right, we'll start you on the 1st of August. So I went to work as a new game warden on the 1st of August, 1975. And back in those days, there was only 4 districts in the state. I got assigned to the Southeast District. Had 1 week of training in each district, pretty short training, and it was a wonderful job. It was a wonderful career. It's a family. There was only 60 game wardens in the state of Iowa at that time. There's 99 counties, 60 game wardens, and we knew everybody just like they were a brother. We knew the families, we knew their kids, we knew everybody. And I was a field officer, first started off in Jefferson, Van Buren County, right down on the Missouri border. And it was a wild place, and a lot of outlaws, a lot of people, didn't know if they were from Missouri or from Iowa. And it was an education. Anyway, I started there in 75, and in 78, I transferred over to the Mississippi River in Louisa County, the most important county in the state back then for waterfowl hunting. And of course, commercial fishing on Mississippi was a big thing. And so I learned a lot about commercial fishing. And meanwhile, I'm still a trapper all along. And Iowa has produced a lot of well-known trappers.
Yeah.
If you think about it, in fact, I was just reading an article just the other day in the American Trapper, and I'm a lifetime member of the Fur Takers. I'm a lifetime member of the NTA. I'm a lifetime member of the Iowa Trappers Association. a member of a lot of stuff, but I was just reading an article from Major Boddicker in American Trapper the other day. And, you know, Major started in Iowa. He's from Vinton, Iowa.
Mhm.
And Bill Nelson, well-known name, he's from Iowa. I never knew Bill. He was dead before I ever met him. J. Curtis Gregg used to write for Hunter Trader Trapper and then later for Fish Game. And probably one of the top mink trappers ever. Bud Hall, another top trapper. Bud lived at Nashua, Iowa, just 15 minutes, 20 minutes north of where I lived at Waverly. In fact, one day I was in selling furs to my fur dealer, Hank Springer in Waterloo. That would have been in probably 72, fall of 72, maybe 73. And Hank asked me, he said, "Hey, Mike," he said, "Hey, you doing anything important tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I got traps to check." And I said, "I got work to do." Well, he said, "I'm going right past your place." I lived right on the highway at Waverly. And Waverly's halfway between Waterloo and Nashua, where Bud Hall lived. Anyway, Hank said, "I'm going to go up to Bud Hall's tomorrow." He said, "Bud's got over 1,200 fox that he got this season."
My gosh.
And he said, "I'm not going to buy them." He said, "I can't buy them." But he said, "There's going to be several other fur buyers there." And he said, "I just want to go up and see that many fox all in one place from one trapper." And he said, "If you want, I'll stop and pick you up." And I declined. And I wished, to this day, I wished I'd have gone with him, because I got to know Bud pretty well years later. Bud gave instruction, mink trapping instruction, but he would not give instruction to anybody that lived within like 50 or 60 geographical miles of where he lived. But after I moved to Washington, Iowa, Bud had a daughter that lived right here in Washington, still lives here in Washington. Anyway, I got to know Bud pretty good, but he is one good trapper, or was anyway. And Tom Krause, you know Tom Krause, he's from Iowa. Craig O'Gorman, he's from Iowa. Don Bierman, if you're familiar with that name.
I remember Don. Yeah.
Yeah, all from Iowa. Good trappers, probably more than what I can. Those are just some of the top guys that I can think of that come to mind right now. And most of those guys I've known myself pretty well. Like I say, I didn't know Bill Nelson personally, but I've read a lot of his stuff. And you probably knew that Sherm Bloom wrote a book about Bill Nelson.
Mhm.
Sherm did an outstanding job in that book, except for he missed one vital part. And that is the fact that Bill Nelson was one of the inductees and one of the guys inducted into the Iowa Trappers Hall of Fame. And Sherm didn't put that in his book.
Oh, shoot.
And yeah, it just must have been an oversight, or somehow he wasn't aware of it. I don't know. But anyway, that's another thing. A guy I became acquainted with when I was in Jefferson Van Buren County was Sonny Hootman. Sonny was as big of an outlaw in the outlaw name that you could ever imagine back in those days. And I was filled in about Sonny before I ever met him, and met him face to face a couple of times. He was known as a deer poacher, as a fish trapper. He just lived off the land, did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, no regard to anything. Well, I became very well acquainted with Sonny, and we became friends and hunting partners for a lot of years. We trapped together one year, 1983. We trapped together that season, and then we trapped again in about 2004 or 5, something like that. But Sonny was very close friends with Bill Nelson, so I got lots of Bill Nelson stories. Sonny was a pallbearer at Bill Nelson's funeral. Sonny knew the formulas, Bill Nelson's formulas Sonny knew him in his head. One day we're together, we're making some fox sets, and he was using super call. And Sonny said, "You want that recipe?" And I said, "Yeah." So right off the top of his head, he gave me Bill Nelson's super call recipe, and I wrote it down. I've still got that written down.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. And anyway, Sonny and I, lifelong friends ever since I met him there. And I guess I first met him in 1975. And we went together to an NTA convention in 1987 at Mansfield, Ohio.
Mhm.
And at Mansfield, a well-known predator caller by the name of Dennis Kirk
Yeah.
was doing some demos. So Sonny and I decided to take in one of his demos. And one of his demos was calling raccoon. And we were intrigued with that. And Dennis Kirk was selling cassette tapes of sounds. And Sonny and I each bought the one called Coon Puppies. And came home. A big thing with Dennis Kirk, he was calling the coon at night. Now, Dennis lived in New York.
Right.
And in New York, you were allowed to use a spotlight at night on those coon. In Iowa, we've got a spotlighting law that there ain't no way you can use a light at night on those coon. So one day before our coon season started, I took that sound and I put it in a little shoebox size tape player that my boys were listening to music on. And I took it down to the Skunk River where I knew there was a den tree. And I turned that call on. Yeah. And there was like a 45-second delay on that tape. And I went and sat back in some bushes. And within seconds of that sound starting, a great big old coon come barreling out of that den, and away it went down the river. I thought, wow, Dennis never said anything about calling them in the daytime. So I wonder if that was just a fluke. So I went about a mile down the river where I knew there was another den tree, and I turned it on. That time it took about 30 seconds before a coon came out. But a coon came out and away it went. That night I called Sonny. I said, "Sonny, have you had a chance to try that call in the daytime?" He said, "I have." And he said he was surprised that coon came out in the daytime. And he said, "What do you say opening day, the season, about 2 weeks later was going to be opening day." He said, "What do you say opening day we go coon calling?" I said, "I can't. I'm going to be setting traps opening day." But I said, "Why don't you come the next day on Sunday?" Our season always open on a Saturday. "Why don't you come on Sunday and you can ride with me on my trap line. And when we get done, we'll go and see if we can call some coon." So we did. He came and got down to the end of my line. At the very end of my line, I was trapping the Skunk River then. The very end of my line was at where Dutch Creek came into and I knew the guy that owned the land on both sides of Dutch Creek, and I'd called him and asked him if I could go hunting on his property, and he said yes. So we parked my boat at the mouth of Dutch Creek, and Sonny and I walked up Dutch Creek and looking for den trees. We found a den tree, and Sonny's carrying a shotgun, and I'm carrying my pistol. And it took about a minute of calling. A coon came out, Sonny shot and killed it with the shotgun. And we went further up the creek and found another den tree and got another coon. That one I killed with my pistol. So we were on to something. So then we started hunting pretty regular coon in the daytime. And it was always worked it around my trapping. And when the river would freeze up, that's when I would start serious coon calling. And when the river freezes up, now here in Iowa, that's normally towards the end of December, those coon are perfectly prime. And we got some really good coon. It was such an effective method. And we'd never heard of anybody calling coon in the daytime. Sonny and I made a pact between us that we would never tell anybody about our coon calling in the daytime. And we lived by that pact. Well, Sonny and I had a little falling out for a few years, and then we got back together. Well, after we got back together, Sonny asked me if I was still calling coon in daytime, and I said, yeah. He said, have you told anybody? And I said, nope, only my sons. I got 3 boys. They all hunt, fish, and trap, same as I do. And anyway, he said, well, I got to confess. He said, he said, I took some hunters from Pennsylvania out to his farm and took them on a coon hunt, daytime coon hunt. And one of them had a video camera and he made a video of it. And he said, he just sent me a DVD. And he said, it's pretty good. He said, you want to look at it? And I said, yeah. So I looked at it and it was good. And Sonny said, he said, have you noticed in some of the magazines that there's a coon calling video out called Boars Gone Wild? It was the only coon calling video on the market. It was by the Borland brothers out in Nebraska. And they owned a Nebraska game call company. Sonny said, you know, pretty soon it's going to get widespread knowledge. He said, what do you say? This is just the cutting edge. What do you say we make a video, our own video of calling coon in the daytime and teach these people how to do it right? Because we got a copy of that Boars Gone Wild, and it's not really an educational, it's just a fun thing. They even show them shooting a coon with a bow in one of their scenes, but it's not really a teaching. So we did that. I bought a new computer so I could do the editing, and Sonny bought the video camera. I ran the camera. Anyway, we did our very first video. We did it together. It's this one called Daytime Raccoon Calling and Hunting. And Sonny Hoopman and Mike Sells. We came out with that video and we started filming it in November, day after Thanksgiving of 2007. We came out with it in 2008. We had grand ideas of making a lot of money off it. And Sonny said, you know what? He said, I'll be totally happy if we could sell 1,000 of those videos. We were selling for $40 a piece. And we sold 1,000 that first year.
Oh my goodness.
And we went to conventions. The first time we ever set up, I shouldn't say we because it was me. I did all the marketing. I set up at the FTA convention in June of 2008 down in Missouri and made a lot of money down there. And that's where I first I'd been to FTA conventions before, but never as a vendor and just as a spectator, and usually just went in one day and is out the same day. Whereas most NTA conventions, I'd spend a couple of days at them. But I got really enthused with the fur takers back then. And shortly after that, I became a lifetime member, mainly at the prompting of Dave Hastings. Dave was such a wonderful representative to the NTA, prompted me to write an article for the FTA, and that prompted me to write a few more articles. And then one day, I sent Dave an email and I said, Dave, what would you think if I started writing a column called under game warden stuff? And he said, I don't know how well that's going to go off. He said, write one and we'll see how it goes. So that was been several years ago and I'm still writing them. So I've just been, I can't say enough good stuff about the FTA. Personally, I can't do enough. I've been, Dave, when he became president, actually before he became president, he shared with me that he had this grand idea of having a history book written about the fur takers of America. And when he told me that, I was in the process of writing a history book for the Iowa Trappers Association. And I got that book done, and one day at a convention, Dave said that a gal by the name of Jane Butler had offered to write the history of the fur takers of America. And Dave was looking for some volunteers to assist her with that. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I thought there'd be more people. Anyway, Jane never followed through. I talked to her one time on the phone, and I just felt that she was going to be in charge of everything. So I just kind of stood back, and I was going to assist her. Well, then I don't remember where we were at a convention, and I told that to Dave, that I said, I don't see that we're getting anywhere with this book. And I said, if I could do it on my own, I think I could get it done within a couple of years. And he said, what do you need? And I said, I need records. I said, I need every Fur Taker magazine that was from the start to right now. And I said, I need board meeting minutes. I said, I need everything I can get. And I said, I'll go around, I'll interview people. Anyway, I'm in the process of doing that right now. I committed to getting that done by next convention. So I'm knee deep into it. I'm having thoughts whether I'm going to get that done by next convention, but I'm working at it. And I've got, I think, 3 chapters done now. I'm getting close. So this winter, when I'm socked in with the bad weather, it's all I'm going to be doing is writing. Anyway, that pretty well brings you up to date on a lot of that stuff. This book, The History of the Fur Takers of America, will be my 7th book. My very first book I showed you earlier was You Gotta Be Tough, subtitled The Paratrooper Story. My second book is called Just Muskrats, and it's all about my trapping muskrats from the time I started, which I just laid out to you, up to the time that I trapped 1,132 muskrats in 10 nights.
Oh my
I
goodness.
was busy. And my best ever in one night was 242 muskrats in one night. My third book was The Adventures of Trapping with Jerry. Another well-known trapper was Jerry Garnyope from Burlington, Iowa. Jerry and I trapped together for 7 seasons, starting in 1980. Wonderful guy. He was 65 years old when I met up with him. And we trapped one season on Lake Rathbun, to where we slept right out on the ground for 2 weeks, in the snow, in the rain, everything. He was 65 years, he was 66 at that time, and just as tough as can be. He came down with cancer, called me, said, he's got cancer. And I said, Jerry, you know what I always say, you got to be tough. And he was, and he lived, another 6 or 8 years after that. My third book, well, that was my third book. The fourth book was Game Warden Case Log. Next book was the History of the Iowa Trappers Association. Next book was Game Warden Case Log Volume 2, which just came out here this summer. And now I'm working on the FTA book. I've got ideas for more books in my head. I've done 4 videos, 3 on calling coon in the daytime, and 1 on my method of water trapping using the fish set, a set that I invented. I normally trap close to 1,000 coon every season, mainly using that fish stake set. In the last 5 to 10 years, I've been using more and more and more of the dog proofs on my water line. All of my dog proofs are set up on drowners, and I got that down to a fine science. In fact, the last year that I caught 1,000 coon, about 500 of them were out of the grizz, and about 500 were out of the fish stake set. So about equal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what more can I tell you guys, or how much time we got left to go?
We got a little bit of time left, Mike. A couple of thoughts. One, did you ever get? I assume you must have got Sonny straightened out on the straight and narrow.
Yes and no. Uh, I don't think there was, I never had occasion to write Sonny a ticket. Uh, you wanted a game warden story. Let me tell you a game warden story. I'd caught in my time in Jefferson Van Buren County, which the Des Moines River ran through that. I'd caught a lot of fish trappers. And I never had occasion to catch Sonny. But when I left Jefferson Van Buren County, went to Louisa County, my replacement in Jefferson Van Buren County had been there almost a year and still hadn't caught a fish trapper, not a single one. And my boss, Rex Emerson, called me one day and he said, Mike, and you had to know Rex, he said, Mike, I want you to pack your bags and I want you to get back over to working with Lowell. And he said, I want you to stay with Lowell until he catches a fish trapper. He said, he ain't caught one yet. And he said, I ain't liking it. And he said, you don't leave him till you catch a fish trapper. You teach him how to do it. So I didn't want to be gone from home very long. So I packed my bags and I got together with Lowell and I decided the best place to catch a fish trapper was where Sonny Hoopman does most of his fish trapping. And I knew other guys trapped that area too that I'd caught. So we went, I met with Lowell before daylight and we drove into an area way back through some fields and we hid our vehicle back at a place that we called the Lime Kiln and could walk down a bluff along the river and drop over the bluff, get down there. And I positioned Lowell down the river to where he could watch about a half-mile stretch. And I went up the river where I could watch about a half-mile stretch. Actually, I could see farther than that. We sat all day and towards evening, here comes a boat up the river. And two guys in the boat, and I knew one of them was not Sonny, but I watched, they got beyond Lowell's line of sight, but they got up to where I was at, and I watched them run 4 or 5 fish traps. And then I radioed down to Lowell and I said, they're coming your way. I wanted him to catch them where they took out. So they were going full bore down the river in an outboard motor, and I couldn't keep caught up. So I'm running along the riverbank. They didn't know I was there because I'm back in the woods, but I wanted to get down to assist him in case they got rowdy. You know, 2 guys against 1. And knowing that they're going to be in some serious trouble, and I'm thinking Lowell's might be in some serious trouble. Well, by the time I get down there, and it's just turning dark, and they were no trouble. Lowell had them under control, and he's in the process of getting the fish out of the boat. And about that time, another boat comes up the river, and it's Sonny. And these 2 guys know Sonny, and we're standing there where their boat is at. And Sonny slows down, and they yell over to him, Sonny, the game warden's caught us fish trapping. And Sonny turned his boat away, turned around, away he went down the river. So undoubtedly, if we hadn't caught those 2 guys, if they hadn't been there at that time, we'd have got Sonny. Because he was running up the river to go check his fish traps. But yeah, we hunted together a lot. And while I hunted with Sonny, he never did anything that warranted a ticket. One time we were turtle trapping way off across southern Iowa. And the first check of the 2 running turtle traps, we had to go, we checked along this lake and then back through an inlet into a creek and then clear up this creek back into a pasture. And we're getting back towards this pasture where we got some turtle traps, some hoop net type turtle traps. And one of them's just a shaking. You can see that trap just a shaking. And so you got a catch. Usually quite a few turtles when it's shaking that bad. We get up and we pulled that thing up and it is full of catfish, big catfish. And Sonny looks at me and he says, we can keep these, can't we? I said, no, we can't. I was still a game warden in those days. I just had time off and I was turtle trapping. And I said, no, we got to release them. Sonny said, can't you go take a walk while I release these? I said, no, Sonny, I ain't gonna do that. I said, I don't ever want to get in a position where somebody can say that because you were my friend, I overlooked a ticket. I'd never overlooked tickets before. I wrote my brother a ticket one time. My sister was madder than hops, but he put me in a position where I had to write the ticket because it was bystanders. And if I didn't write him, they could get by with the same thing that he thought he could get by with. So I wrote him a ticket. I would have wrote Sonny if he had kept those catfish, but we didn't. We released the catfish, but he almost cried. You know, he almost cried. So anyway, Sonny and I had some ups and downs. When I first met Sonny, he was a terrible alcoholic, but I got him away from that. And when he was sober, he was good. But then in the later years, he got to drinking again. He started drinking when we first started filming this video. He started drinking again, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And we finally had to part ways. So anyway, he died just a year ago. And when we parted ways, we still had videos to sell. And I told him, I said, Sonny, I'm never going to sell another of our videos as long as you are alive. And I didn't. And now that he's dead, now I'm selling them again.
Yeah.
But we went in 50-50 on it. So anyway, that's just the way it went.
So Mike, where can people find your books and DVDs?
Well, right now, the only place I'm advertising is in the Fur Taker magazine. So if the people are not members of the Fur Takers of America, by gosh, I really appeal to them to join the FTA for all the benefits. But in there, they'll see my advertisement, and that gives my address where they can send or order directly from me, or F&T Fur Harvesters Trading Post carries my books and videos. Cumberland's Northwest Trapper Supplies carries my books and videos. Keith Winkler at Sterling Fur Company at Sterling, Ohio carries my books and videos. And there's other people around. In my advertisement, it shows other people that have them. But if they want to call me, 319-653-5873, and leave a message, because if you're not in my contact list, my cell phone is going to block your call, but it won't block a voice message. So leave me a message, and I'll get back with them. And yeah, they get the books or videos directly from me. I really encourage them to get from one of the advertisers, F&T or Sterling or Cumberland's. And yeah, I put out a quality product. There's nothing shabby about it. I've never had anybody ask for, I shouldn't say that. I had one guy ask for his money back on the very first video ever. We're doing a convention 2008 at Mason City, Iowa, is the NTA convention. And this guy came along and bought the video, $40. And he grumbled a little bit about it. He thought it was a little bit high. Major Boddicker was set up right next to me selling his stuff. He came over and bought one. He said, by God, he said, I really like to buy stuff from people that know the value of their product. And he peeled out $40 and other people, they cut rate stuff and that's not good. But anyway, that guy the very next day came back with the video in hand and he said, I want my money back. And I got customers around. And I said, well, why do you want your money back? Well, he said, I knew most of the stuff on there already. And he said, I watched that last night in his camper. And he said, I watched the whole thing last night. He said, I don't need it anymore. I want my money back. I said, that's not good enough reason. I said, if it was defective, I'd replace it or give you your money back.
Yeah.
But you've already watched it, and I can't help it if you didn't learn as much as what you thought you was going to learn. So that's the only person that's ever asked for his money back. That was in 2008. And so I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mike, for joining us. We'll definitely have to do this again. I want some more CO stories.
Yeah. I
There's
think
got to be a part 2.
we'll have to do a part 2 to this.
I'd be glad to do it anytime you're ready. And we can make it mostly CO stories if you want,
Okay.
and intermingle a little bit of stuff here and there. But I thought, see, and this is the first time I've ever done something like this, aside from Mark Steck interviewed me at the NTA convention last year
Mhm.
in Spencer, a year ago in Spencer. And he had his video guy doing a video. And then Mark came and went with me on the Muskrat line last fall, a year ago.
Mhm.
And he said that's supposed to be on a YouTube video on, he said in October, but so far I haven't seen it. So aside from that, this is the first time I've done something like this. And I really appreciate Justin here getting me set up on this Zoom stuff. I'd heard about Zoom, but I had no idea how,
Well, now you
how it
know.
worked. So this broke the ice for me. But yeah, I'll be willing to do. But anyway, I focused on what I'm focusing on today because I thought a lot of your viewers may not be familiar with me and might want to know a little bit about my background. So I might have given a little bit more than what they were expecting as far as my mom kicking me out and all that.
Well,
Anyway.
we appreciate that. And there's not, I mean, that's a great background. So, and there's not many people that can say that they went through all of the things that you went through. So that's very interesting. And,
Yeah.
you know, to
Live in the
end
tent
where
in
you're
the middle
at.
of winter. Yep. Okay. So you're going to cut this off, huh?
All right,
Yeah.
Mike, we appreciate it and we'll do it again.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Good visiting with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.